A very good morning or a good evening or good afternoon to all of you, depending on where you're joining us for this webinar today. I'm really thrilled to welcome all of you to our discussion on the future of tourism. And I'm very happy to see senior government officials, tourism experts, professionals, industry representatives all present at this virtual event. So let me first begin by introducing and welcoming our three esteemed panelists. So we have first Maria del Pilar Garrido Gonzalo, Minister of Planning and Economic Policy of the Republic of Costa Rica. Our second panelist is Gebhard Rayner, Chief Executive Officer of the Sandals Resorts. And our third panelist is Trevor Weltman, former Chief of Staff of Pacific Asia Tourism Association, and now a partner at the Clickable Impact Consulting Group in Asia. So I very much look forward to an engaging discussion with our panel. But before we kick off the discussion, let me first say that this event coincides with the launch of a new paper prepared by staff of the International Monetary Fund on tourism in the post-pandemic world. The paper takes a deep dive into the economic impact of COVID-19 on tourism, notably in Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean regions, and explores policy options to help the tourism sector navigate the post-pandemic world. So the IMF is watching tourism-related developments closely because, as you all know too well, tourism has become a significant driver of economic activity around the world. According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, tourism directly accounts for about 3.5% of global GDP, and that increases to a whopping 10% when you consider the linkages tourism has to other sectors. So clearly, any disruption to tourism can have a significant socioeconomic impact, and the COVID-19 crisis has magnified this challenge. Tourism provides critical jobs to youth, women, and migrant workers, who we know are groups that are suffering disproportionately. The crisis has also imposed financial strains on firms in the tourism industry, especially small and medium enterprises, leading to long-term economic scarring and job losses. Governments across a broad range of countries have taken impressive steps to cushion this blow and minimize job losses. But the survival of businesses and jobs remains at risk, and more support may well be needed in 2021 and beyond to ensure that recovery is indeed well entrenched. So what then can governments and the industry do to respond to this shock? Carefully designed fiscal stimulus targeted to help the ailing tourism sector and households is needed, while being, of course, mindful of available policy space and debt sustainability that will, of course, differ in different country contexts. In some countries, targeted support in the tourism sector could take the form of assisting firms adapting their business models and retraining staff to ensure continued viability. And monetary and financial policies can help in providing credit relief to borrowers who are solvent. In general, policy support should be directed to firms that were viable prior to the pandemic, with consideration for those that generate high social value due to linkages they have with the local economy and particularly with employment. And some countries have focused on restarting domestic tourism first. In China, for instance, the nascent post-COVID-19 recovery in tourism was led by domestic demand. In the Caribbean, Jamaica introduced measures to promote discounted domestic travel. A real recovery, however, will only be possible when international tourism returns. And that in turn requires focus on two areas. First, global cooperation on an equitable distribution of vaccines. And second, a special attention to health and hygiene protocols so that travel restrictions can be safely lifted. Such actions are critical for us to revive the tourism economy while living alongside the virus in the short to medium term. But in the long term, the crisis is also an opportunity to promote structural transformation within and beyond the tourism sector. And this means adapting to stronger, more sustainable, and resilient tourism economy in the new post-pandemic normal. And as the paper notes, this means greater focus on low density and eco-sustainable tourism services where possible to help reduce health risk and strengthen and support a low carbon transition. It also means strengthening health systems at the country level to enhance attractiveness of tourist destinations. This could also entail promoting a health tourism industry in some. And lastly, it means leveraging technological innovation to ensure the safety and protection of tourists and workers. So measures we put in place today will shape the tourism of tomorrow. And with that, I think we'll now turn to our discussion. We have a panel of experts who we're eager to hear from on their strategy to exit the crisis, on what they believe can be a roadmap for tourism in the new normal. So the first question I would pose is for Minister Garrido. Now, in the very uncertain environment before us, wondered whether you could speak to us about what more governments can do to support tourism and how should such support be structured. Very eager to hear your views on that, Minister.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to participate with you today and with the panelists as well. The first thing that I want to say is that this crisis has affected Costa Rica severely because a lot of our economy and a lot of our employment depends on tourism. Nearly 600,000 direct and indirect employees are working with the industry. Also, it is very important for us to note that nearly 94% of the tourist industry in our country are small enterprises, and those are composed of nearly 40% of their accommodation is composed with nearly more than 40% of rooms in itself. It's very small. So it's affected us a lot, and now we have put into place a roadmap. And the first thing that we started to do is to get the Safe Travel seal from YTO, and it has helped us a lot in order to grant that more than 250 enterprises can actually obtain this seal so that they can make others feel safe in order to attract the excuse tourism that's coming to our country every time a little bit more, but to make this send a message that they're traveling safe. Another important thing that we have been working on are 20 key measures. We just put this into place the last week as a roadmap. And so these measures rank between training employees and rethinking schemes of working in the new normal. Towards also to giving them more facilities in terms of credit. The supervision of our financial system has also agreed to establish a payment capacity analysis that it is linked with the recovery phase of tourism to give them at least from 2.5 to 4 years to stop, because this is how long it will take approximately to us in order to recover the rank we were and the level we were having of attraction of tourists before 2020 in 2020 years. And then to get there, we will need approximately 2.5 years to 4 years, and so the payment capacity analysis is going to give us this, because this is solvent and viable enterprises. But what we need is to give them some oxygen so that they can actually keep on working. Something else we have been giving them is a rural credit and rural loans with specific conditions for them. Reduce the cost of electricity, and something else what we have been doing is to to also think about giving them extensions on their working permits because they have been expiring and it's very complicated for them to have the solvency in order to start to keep on working. So we just gave them we just give them the possibility for them to extend those permits and working permits and reduce the cost of them. Something else that we have been doing is incentivizing domestic tourism, which is not going to be the same, of course, but it is also key. So we have been making working arrangements so that you can accumulate your working hours and then have one day off, either Friday or Monday, so that you can actually visit places and then have better conditions, also credit conditions for you to pay afterwards, so you can actually go visit these places. And something else that we have been doing is to think about the transformation the sector needs as well. There's thinking about what other areas can we incentivize. So yes, the medical and wellness tourism is one of the areas Costa Rica can focus on, and wellness in order to develop. Also the filmic industry, because we have very beautiful locations, so we can attract filmmakers to this area. Another things we have been working on is cultural locations, and we have something called the complex management of our tourist centers. So this is a combination between the Tourism Costa Rican Institute and as well as our Ministry of Culture, so that they can work together in terms of putting into value our traditions and putting into value our heritage, so that we can actually create other hotspots for tourism that are not as dependent on foreign tourism and are not as exposed to shocks as what we have been experiencing right now. Other things that we have been doing, and this would be the last thing, is just to build up on infrastructure in national parks. And so we have been working on and given more money and working on having better infrastructure in the highest visiting national parks, but also in other areas, so that we can incentivize tourism in there, as well as Parque Marino Ballena or Corcovado or Amistad, which maybe ring a bell for you. And this is going to be just a coordination between local governments and the government itself, our environment ministry, and also the tourist sector. These are all demands that came from the private sector. So the government, along with the private sector, with the leadership of my colleague, Minister of Tourism, have been developing this, and we want to make sure that these 20 measures can actually help us build back better and give some ease to the tourist sector that will take a little to just be in the level it used to be before the pandemic.
Minister, thank you so much for that comprehensive set of responses outlining what your country has put in place already and is proactively looking at in terms of how to position Costa Rica in this new world we'll be facing. I mean, you spoke to issues covering support, of course, to the industry, but in a very considered way in terms of the viability of enterprises and the need to keep a focus on that. Talked about issues around the regulatory environment and things that help businesses to continue in terms of extending their permits and all of those other things that can really consume businesses, and of course looking at the future and looking at domestic tourism and the potential there, and how to tie that into all of the new things you're building to build forward better. So a lot to absorb in what you've put on the table and told us, and a very proactive government response, I would say. Let's, as you said, of course, all of this very much informed by input from the private sector. So we'll turn to an actor in the private sector and ask him whether, in his experience, there are other issues that governments might be wanting to do at this stage, and in terms of positioning also for the new world. Mr. Rayner, would you like to come in on this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on to the panel. I agree with the Minister in terms of the efforts that need to be extended to really ensure that the tourism sector locally is supported in terms of its survival itself, but also in terms of promoting to the local population, as well as promoting the different aspects of what tourism can be within a country. I think right now the biggest issue is really all about knowledge and information, and that's where governments, I think, have to play a big role and a stronger role. It's that link between the private sector and the government sectors, making sure that there is a coordinated effort in vaccinations, for example, specifically in this part of the world where tourism is such a large contributor to GDP. It needs to be recognized that tourism workers need to be right after the frontline workers and the over 65 from a vaccination point of view, because tourists won't come once they are vaccinated to a place where they are exposed to people who are not vaccinated. And that's going to be another challenge for us in tourism. So there's a lot of realism that has to come into the conversation, a lot of transparency that needs to be displayed by all sectors involved in order to make this happen right now. You can't start talking about that when the issue has been raised and is an issue. We need to talk about this now before it becomes an issue, in order to be ready to deal with the influx of tourism, because there's no question the rebound is going to be strong in our industry.
Now, thank you very much, Mr. Reiner. And as you've underscored, of course, action on the vaccine front is front and center, and the access to vaccines and the priority to give to those most on the front line, as you say, and here in the industry, the very important place that workers in the industry play, and the potential reluctance of tourists, of course, to come to places where they know workers have not been vaccinated. So a big challenge as we live every day around the vaccine front, and very pertinent in this case in the tourism sector. So let's also hear from Mr. Waltman, of course, with his deep knowledge of the sector and across the experience in Asia in particular, on this issue of what more governments can do.
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists, and of course to you, MD MSEA, and the rest of IMF for having me here today. Quickly, what I would want to share that hasn't been shared is looking at the informality of the tourism sector, particularly in tourism hotspots around our region here in the Asia Pacific, although I think it's germane to many, if not most, regions around the world. Here in developing economies in our region, we're looking at millions of people employed informally in these economies. And as you shared in your introduction, given that a significant percentage of them are women and young people, the shocks from COVID are not only going to be felt from now until the time tourism recovers or a few years after. These could be large felt or long-term impacts that look to undermine a lot of the development that's happened over the last 10 or 20 years in these economies. Specifically, just to one economy in our region, it's been projected that Thailand will have lost 6 million jobs in 2020 due to COVID-19. However, even if the country achieves its 50% immunization goal by the end of this year, we're not looking at a tourism recovery at least until Q2 2022. Now, what's important about this is with so many millions employed informally here, plus millions employed formally in the economy, there's been projected 10 million tourists to come this year. Likely that number is going to be zero. And as has been reported over the last week, or be very low, if only 25% of that 10 million comes over the next year, 75% of the tourism workforce in Thailand will have lost its job. So I'm going to round this off by saying what began as a health crisis, we all know morphed very quickly into an economic crisis. But frankly, in many of our tourism hotspots around the world, we don't have to sit back and watch anymore. This has already become a social crisis and an inclusion crisis. So I think as we talk about tourism, we have to start talking about it from those angles as well. Just as important as the industry recovery is really looking at what are some of the other social and security nets we have in place to help these formal and informal workers at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waltman. And indeed, the attention to the conditions of workers, especially in the informal sector, and the prevalence of the informal tourism activities in many countries is hugely important, and really focusing on what it takes to bring back those jobs has to be the core focus, and in a world that we want to make more inclusive, absolutely, and where we want recovery of those livelihoods that have been lost. So, a very important set of points you've made. We've been talking already about how we work to exit from this crisis, but I wanted to have perhaps a more focused discussion on that by asking Mr. Reiner, who of course is struggling from the industry perspective, about how countries should be, and the industry should be promoting a safe and a successful reopening to tourists. And are there lessons we already have from countries that are already reopening to tourists that you might be able to share? Please, Mr. Reiner. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think first and foremost, like I said before, it's really about knowledge and information. We need to change the narrative. We need to change the narrative to the extent that we need to go out there and tell the story that travel as it is today already, and tourism as it stands now, is not as dangerous or is not as complicated or cumbersome as it's being sometimes portrayed. It's often easier to spread negative news and sensationalism than it is to talk about the simple things in life, or the simple things that are that have been achieved already today. So there has to be a stronger push on changing the narrative. And when you get on a plane today, there are requirements, of course, that everybody has to comply with, but we're getting used to that, like we've gotten used to so many other things. When 9/11 happened, we got used to the new security screening at the airports. Initially, we all thought we're never going to fly again because we have to be at the airport 2 or 3 hours before departure. Today, there's no second thought wasted on it. So that the ease of the conversation or the narrative has to change. The ease of travel is there already today, as long as everybody complies with protocols and with what the requirements are. Are there examples in terms of early lessons learned? Yes, there are. And I use maybe 2 examples to quickly walk through. One is Jamaica and the other one is St. Lucia. I think Jamaica has done a tremendous job in very early understanding what needs to be done in order to keep the country open after it reopened, and to make sure that there is some sort of resemblance of tourism that comes in. Jamaica today within the Caribbean has the largest numbers of incoming tourists of all the islands. How did we achieve that here? Well, the government established, together with the private sector, with the Minister of Tourism, with the Tourism Development Board, what's called here a tourism corridor, which runs from the south coast all the way up to the north coast and into Kingston, a few miles inland, that are identified and allow tourists to move around freely. Once they are on resort, they're allowed to move around within the tourism corridor. Tourism workers are allowed to move around within the tourism corridor. There are protocols to it, of course. When you go into public places, when you are in common areas, you have to wear a mask. Social distancing or physical distancing is required. But when you're on resort, you can actually enjoy a very carefree vacation. We have so many testimonials today from customers and from guests who have been here as to the amazing experience that they have had. And it's a natural human desire from an emotional point of view that, one, you want to get away from what you perceive to be a lockup or restrictions in your personal life right now. And once you do get away and have that little bit of fear as to how you do get away, about what happens if I get stuck, and the medical facilities, and now specifically with North America, specifically with the US, requiring a negative test going back home, back into the US, same as the UK. What happens if I test positive and I can't fly back? But these are all things that are very easy to alleviate in the mind of a traveler. What happens if you if you test positive, well, the worst thing that can happen today, and I speak from our company's experience, and we promote this to our clients, is that your vacation is extended by a further 2 weeks. We have medical facilities, we have insurance, we take care of the expenses, we make sure that you do get home, and should the unfortunate event happen that you actually have severe symptoms, then we have arrangements in place that you're medically evacuated back to your home country. But it's all about information and knowledge. And I think, like I said, Jamaica has done a tremendous job in regard to that. They have made it a lot easier for people to come. It's very easy to get to the airports here now. They have efficiently worked through the system with the health checks when you arrive. There's no more COVID testing on arrival because you bring your test with you. We have testing facilities on resorts like all the other resorts have today as well. Second example would be St. Lucia. St. Lucia the government there has been extremely active in ensuring that the island stays open and ensuring and working closely with the tourism sector to make sure that there is, again, an ease and understanding of how people can come back to the country and have a vacation. And there is a clear separation between local residents and citizens versus tourists coming back in. The requirements are slightly different. And the protocols are different from a quarantine perspective and the follow-up tracing perspective. But it's having a practical and realistic approach to how to deal with this situation and the pandemic. It's something that it can be made into something very, very bad. And maybe we need to learn to go back to our normal lives and continue to ensure that people are safe. Of course, from a private sector responsibility point of view, hygiene protocols have been increased and will continue to have to increase and will have to be implemented on a go-forward basis. Of course, there is going to be a natural demand of, in our opinion, of people wanting more space around them. I think it's an opportunity for the industry. In terms of rethinking where did we get to pre-COVID and where do we have to go to after COVID in order to make this all work going forward.
Very, very informative, Mr. Rainer. Thank you so much for that and for reminding us of the world before 9/11 and how we traveled then and how we travel now. And what a huge, I mean, we never imagined we'd be taking off our shoes all the time when we went to the airports, but now that's second nature. If you're a traveler, you don't even think about it. And so you underscoring the importance of information sharing and the narrative is quite important. Of course, I would think, I can imagine that in this sort of experience of these travel corridors, the collaboration between the industry, the governments, the airlines, all of that is so critical, and that has to be quite good to get that to work effectively. So issues around how to get that sort of result in other places and what it takes to do that. Very, very important. You already started talking about some of the issues to focus on looking forward as well. And I'm sure that Minister Garrido will want to respond to some of what she's heard in terms of, what makes for a safe return of tourists and what needs to be done to prepare that properly. So let me turn to her for her perspective.
Yes, in Costa Rica, we have been working hard in terms of hygiene protocols and the compliance with those hygiene protocols, and also guarding travel bubbles and all the social distancing and having all the arrangements put into place. It has surprised me. In the last 2 weeks, I had the opportunity to contribute with domestic travel as well in the country, and it surprised me how it all changed and how they are prepared to receive you, and how all the other tourists behave. It's just different. It's just a different mindset. And it made me proud that a lot of these establishments were also ready to receive visitors in a different way, and for you to feel safe, but at the same time have the chance to experience what you came looking for. And in our case, all the sustainable and sustainability experience that the national parks and other attractions give you. And so having this balance between making you feel safe and having all the arrangements in place just in case you get sick or in case you require special medical attention, but at the same time guiding the experience of living and traveling and visiting a different country, that is what we have been working on. And also with vaccines, it's also going to slowly change some of the sector as well. In our case, we have been working very hard in order to have this vaccination plan into place. We're already finishing phase 2, starting phase 3. So we're moving forward with that because we acknowledge what Trevor just said, that this is not about health itself, it's also about our economy and the need to have be more resilient, not only the sector, but the economy itself, and to protect our population and to try to regain and have back those jobs that we were guarding at the beginning. Something else that thinking about the tools that SMEs in our country, tourist SMEs, require, we have also put into place a grant fund so that they can actually, for those enterprises that have cash flow problems as well, in order to make all the arrangements to be more prepared to receive tourists, then we have also been giving them support in terms of credit, and the government has been giving them grants and acknowledging the risk and serving them in order for them to start working better and to keep on working, knowing that only with the condition for them to maintain the jobs that they have right now and to have a plan to build, to regain and to make the employees that they had before come back and be part of the industry as well. We have also we're worried about this other informality sector, because in our country, informality is around 46% overall in our country, and we know that most of this also comes from services, but also from tourism, and in the possibility that we have to accelerate and comply with protocols and reinvent ourselves and try to feel everyone safe, but at the same time having the experiences I mentioned is the way that we can actually make them come back and having them also a lifestyle that it can ensure them to live in a better condition that they used to before. Perhaps it's an opportunity as well, and it's not only about thinking about the crisis itself, but looking at different ways in which tourism can be transformed and the government helping in that effort so that we can actually accelerate those transformations where we wanted to go before in a faster way.
Oh, thank you so much, Minister. Thank you for that intervention and those comments on what you've been already working on. Let's get Mr. Weltman's perspective also on this issue of the exit strategy and how we go about it and what some of the challenges are there, perhaps especially on this issue of collaboration on technological maybe innovation that one needs to facilitate to allow a safe return of tourists and in terms of social distancing norms and other points you might want to make. Mr. Weltman, please.
Thank you very much. I think it's important to say that policy comes before technology. The technology is really important to enable the reopening of travel. But the need of the day is actually the regional cooperation and the communications that comes to share with the travelers, as my fellow panelists shared, in order to let them understand what those policies are and where they're in place. So we need to double and triple our efforts looking for the bilateral and trilateral agreements, or these travel corridors, between increasingly more countries as vaccinations continue to climb in terms of population percentages. Recently, as we've seen with Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, they have a trilateral agreement that they've put into place, allowing vaccinated adults to travel between countries, or vaccinated individuals. Seychelles and Georgia are perhaps the most open countries in the world right now in terms of being fully open to anybody with a vaccine. But who knows which of these countries is requiring a PCR test? Who knows if it's 24 hours or 72 hours or 24 hours? Is there still any type of quarantine upon arrival, or do you have to go to a special place, et cetera? And I'm not saying this to call out these individual countries who are, I believe, doing a good job, but it's different. And so without the regional cooperation, as we get deeper into recovery, we're going to see an entrenchment of fragmentation, unfortunately. So the real need of the day and a real need for, or a real opportunity for the international community, the development partners and international organizations, is to leverage the years and decades of regional cooperation experience that they bring to the table to help the tourism industry coordinate with the health ministries and the ministries of security and safety in order to facilitate this. Now, just as a final soundbite on this issue, after we have the policy in place, or coterminously as we're developing it, then comes the technology piece. Now, this could be a bottomless conversation that could take us for a whole nother webinar. But we need to start looking at the blockchain technologies that are currently being piloted around the world as real innovations that could change travel in the same way my panelists have shared, taking off our shoes when we travel, or the safety protocols that came after 9/11. And so I'll end by saying, it's really worth looking into what IATA has done with the Travel Pass and what the World Economic Forum is doing with the Commons Project, with their Commons Pass, in terms of how blockchain and then coordinating the transference of secure health data across borders could more quickly facilitate the reopening of travel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weltman. A number of very important points there. The importance, of course, first and foremost, of policy before you can talk about technology and how technology can actually make a difference. Policy issues, of course, need to be sorted out beforehand. And the importance of regional cooperation, hugely important, especially, I would think, even more so in your part of the world, but in the Caribbean as well, with small island economies and the challenges they face, and the potential that collective response to the crisis has for them. Very important points there. So I'm going to stick with you for a while longer, and then as to maybe you've been speaking to the future already. But again, to just say, to focus a bit more on how the tourism sector can transform itself in skillful ways, with innovation, with technology, to adjust to the new normal in the long term. So as I said in my opening remarks, this is an opportunity as well. It's a huge opportunity to transform. And what will it take to be able to do that, in your view?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Big question, not a small one. and I'll start by saying two things. First is, the key word here is actually transform, or as we've been saying, regenerate. And beyond that, even though I'm going to say this with a smile and a laugh, I have a pretty realistic, or maybe perhaps more pessimistic understanding of what it's going to take, or what we're going to see in this new normal, if it's even going to be a new normal. So I'm going to quote my business partner, Jason Martin Lusk, with what he's sort of coined now as the narrow path forward as we talk about, or as we look towards having a green recovery or regeneration of the tourism industry. Now, since the early part of the crisis last year, there have been many pundits in our industry talking about how this green recovery is definitely going to take place. The industry must transform. And frankly, I'm here to say that a green recovery is far from a fait accompli. As we've seen in markets around the world that have recovered, the demand is extraordinary to return to travel. And we're seeing that demand only grow over time. People want to get out and travel. Couple this with a strong incentive from the trade to return to business as usual, or traditional models of tourism, or unsustainable models of tourism in many destinations. And it's hard to see where this green recovery is going to take place. And I want to bring this on a very practical note, because we're looking at a lot of survey data, including reports that I've written in and I've endorsed as well, that show that travelers are looking towards these more health conscious decisions, or natural resorts or eco resorts where there's more social distancing. And certainly we are seeing increases there. But in markets where there have been strong domestic recoveries, for example, in our region, China, Vietnam, Thailand, we're seeing a return to the traditional business models. And in China, in Moon Festival, in the autumn of last year of 2020, 637 million people traveled domestically in China during that time. And that was not 637 million people traveling under new ways of travel, more sustainable travel, et cetera. So this is where we have this sort of narrow pathway forward. If we're truly going to build back better, and I believe it's an if, we're going to need those thoughtful policy interventions that leverage this extreme need of business continuity in the short term for sustainable long-term outcomes. And so I believe every destination actually has a choice, and we have to focus on destinations. So first is going to be this laissez-faire approach. And unfortunately, we're seeing this a lot with the destinations that we speak to, which is we're going to do our best to help our trade right now, socially and economically, but there's not very much we can do. However, when tourism comes back, because there is this pent-up demand, the market will respond. The businesses that went out, new businesses will come up. But unfortunately, that's going to lead to us just witnessing the same market failures return. And this is where we have that opportunity, though. If we can convince destination managers that over-tourism is actually eroding their cultural and natural heritage, and this means that they can start to embrace that in some ways their destination is a wasting asset with short-term gains only, then there can be a very strong incentive to seize this opportunity for regeneration. Now, how can we achieve this? How can we walk this narrow path? What we've been talking about is how we can look to some of these more holistic accounting metrics and empower governments to use these. How can we show governments and their residents the degree by which they've been actually subsidizing the tourism industry in terms of infrastructure investments, taxes, affordability on housing, and the sentiment of the locals themselves? If we can provide this, and if we can showcase through certain destination pilots or with key governments who are willing to invest in this regeneration, then we can get out of this crisis, I believe, with greater hope. And this is necessarily going to happen on a destination by destination basis. The final thing I'll say is in line with your question to us before we started the webinar, which is looking at some of the finance models. How can some partners such as IMF or other development partners get involved and better intervene in tourism at this time? As I shared with you, I'd hesitate to ever presume to tell the IMF what to do, but just sharing some trends that I'm seeing across development. There's a real opportunity for tourism to rise on the development agenda. And to date, that hasn't been the case. Tourism, because of its lack of a vertical supply chain, doesn't fit cleanly into a lot of the traditional definitions of industry development or sectoral development. Well, the time to change that could be now. And some of the ways where the international community has strong knowledge is with the regional cooperation piece I already mentioned, as well as the finance piece. How can we create new vehicles of concessional financing to support tourism actors in both the public and private sector in this near-term part of the crisis where even the domestic banks may be tightening their lending? But then also, how can we work with some long-term partners or even mid to long-term partners such as private equity who have the skills to come in, who are looking to hold assets for a period of time, 3 years or 5 years, to work tightly with our partners in the development community to help these businesses survive and these governments make better investments tied to sustainable outcomes. So I've shared a lot, and we can talk about this for a while, but that's sort of our read on that narrow path forward. Thank you.
No, you have indeed shared a lot and a lot to sink our teeth into and to reflect on, but all of them very important in terms of how we really tackle getting through this narrow path to a better future for tourism and for the economies, of course, that depend on it so much in a more sustainable way. And a role for governments and for the private sector, of course, in different aspects of that need to be worked on, and a role for the international community and international financial institutions like the IMF. And we're never reluctant to hear voices of what the fund can do more and better. So input in that regard is important. One of the key messages we've been underscoring in the recent months, of course, is the challenge around vaccine distribution and access to needy countries, including many of those dependent on tourism. And of course, the fund is in the, as you say, concessional financing for our low-income country members is hugely important. So, quite a few of them tourist-dependent economies as well. And we're working very hard to expand our concessional financing capability. So with that, I know we're running out of time, but we want to certainly hear the perspectives of Mr. Rayner, of course, and Minister. I'll give Minister the last word. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Rayner to see if he wants to add to the thinking for the future.
Yeah, just a few things here. I think, and it's very much in line with what Trevor has said. I think the underlying understanding has to be that, of course, there's commerce there that drives in a big way as to what's going to happen going forward. There's government as well, and the regulatory body that can step in and make sure we don't go back to the old ways of things. There's always going to be the attraction of cheap vacations in the tourism sector, which will require volume to make it work and will result in loads of people ending up in the same place in the same space. And from a commercialization perspective, price still dictates. There's no question about that. For some customer segments, the attractiveness of a vacation destination, as cheap as it gets, is what drives them to go there. But here is where governments have to step in and declare themselves as to how they want to be perceived as a tourism destination going forward. For most tourism destinations, the attractiveness of their location is unique. It cannot be recreated or replicated. Once you have overbuilt a beach in the Caribbean, you cannot replace it and say, well, let's build out another beach here and do it over there in a different way. It's gone. The same with places like Rome and Venice and where you have historic. You can replicate the Colosseum, but there is only one original Colosseum. There's only one Venice. And once these destinations are gone, there's only one rainforest in Costa Rica. And once that's gone, it's gone. We can create an artificial world for ourselves, but the originals are not going to be there. So this is where government has to come in and make sure that it's understood that going forward, the consumer is becoming more educated and has to become more educated and will focus more on quality rather than quantity. And I think governments need to push on that with programs that Trevor indicated in terms of making sure that from a social and a welfare perspective, that the population is given the opportunity taken care of to make a living and earn a living without having to rely on mass tourism. The last thing I wanted to say is, and it's something that I personally keep struggling with, is the fact of our references to the new normal that's coming. I disagree with the new normal. I say that it's going to be going back to normal. The reason why I say that is because really every day is a new normal. Every day we continuously and constantly evolve and we move forward. The world is not standing still, and innovations, advancements continue to be in every sector. The evolution of us as human beings continues, and hence I think we're just going back to normal, because every day we develop a new normal for us. What we need to learn is to deal with the situations at hand and what comes in the future. And that's what requires the coordination between all constituencies. I think the IMF can play a huge role and is playing a huge role in here in bringing, first of all, the right constituencies to the table, and secondly, supporting the initiatives in ways that only the IMF can do because of the global span that you have and the reach that you have. So I think we are on the right track and we're on a good path. We just need to be continuously taking the politicization out of the subject and be honest and informative about what needs to be done.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rayner, for that, for those words and your perspective on the future. As you say, the phrase of a new normal has its limitations, and certainly focusing on the challenges we have today and how to take them forward is what is at stake on a day-to-day basis. And many issues for governments, of course, Minister Garrido, not least of which is strengthening overall competitiveness of economies, even when there's a prospects of a new type of tourism making a difference. But amidst all of that is the issue of export competitiveness also, and other areas that Costa Rica has been working very hard on, and of course the eco-tourism and the issues there that you have to take forward. One of the points made by Mr. Rayner, of course, is balancing of making sure that a focus on sustainable and maybe more limited tourism, or tourism in a different way with space and all of that, makes also space for maintaining jobs. And that's a balancing, I think, sometimes that governments will need to look at. It may not be feasible in every country to move to a fully eco-tourist sort of model in the short term, medium term. But Minister, why don't you help us close this conversation with your perspective?
Yes, the first thing that I wanted to put attention on is how we have been dealing with strengthening coordination. Before, it used to be only about tourism and the private sector and it's the sector itself, and looking abroad and thinking about the global economy and how dynamic it is. But now it's also about improving the coordination with other entities like the health or the Ministry of Environment or other institutions internally. So that has been really good for us as well, and improving communication and rethinking the role that the sector has. Also about those regional dialogues and regional communication, thinking about Latin America and the Caribbean, knowing about the differences, but also where can we actually help each other with sharing knowledge and sharing good practices, and also tales about failures and what not to do. That can help us countries a lot, and deal with that communication. So I believe that the IMF could also help in that area, just about helping us understand each other better with the local and regional dialogues. But of course, that is one area. The other area has to do because we have limited fiscal space, and because the needs of investing are very high. There is this need of putting into place tools that have to do with credit, but at the same time thinking about other options like venture capital funds or other very innovative financial mechanisms, where I believe that those innovative alternatives is another space where the IMF can actually help governments begin and deal with those new instruments in order to build back better and reinvent the sector itself. And also thinking about sustainability when it comes to our country, not only about the greener spots or thinking about the more environmental spots, but also thinking about the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. And this is where it matches with the needs to protect our population, also with the needs for them to have a good living. And make their dreams and their aspirations also come true as human beings in their local communities. And something important for us has to do with exploring other segments of tourism, also to broaden our offer in terms of health, of wellness, of cultural settings, of cinematography, and other areas where our country will have a lot to give. And one last element has to do with because it's not as intensive in space and not as populated, this concept of the tourism that we have been working on, and that is just reviving with and beginning to work with the new normal that Rainer doesn't like. But with this new concept, it is also about experiencing what's important and putting into place what's important, and really looking at the locations again and thinking, what can we do more so that they can feel safe and experience better what we have to offer. And so balancing those 2 elements with it is also something we are going to work on.
Excellent, Minister. Excellent for bringing us to this place, bringing together all the strands we've been discussing, and very much value all of your inputs, all 3 of you, into what the fund can be thinking more about and can be working to facilitate more in terms of experience sharing, and of course bringing partners to the table in terms of its helping governments to think through more innovative or new ways, new financing prospects that they may have, and working with them to make sure that those are in a macro context that has potential for even more robust and sustainable growth, working on all of those issues in a way that brings the international community closer together in this moment of absolute need to collaborate and to work more effectively together, first and foremost on the vaccine front. that is hugely critical to your sector and to all sectors, but certainly to the tourism sector. We've really appreciated this conversation with you. It's the first of, I hope, many, because we are hugely taken by the need to think more deeply about how tourism-dependent economies really adjust to a new growth model. And we've covered many aspects of that in this conversation, but certainly a lot for us to learn and to sink our teeth into in giving appropriate advice to our member countries and in helping them deal with some of the financing issues around that. So let's end our conversation there, unfortunately, because we could go on for, I'm sure, a couple of more hours and talking about these very important issues. But I invite all of those who are listening to this conversation certainly to take a look at the paper that we're launching also today, which is Tourism in the Post-Pandemic World. And it's on the IMF's website, easily accessible, and encourage people to take a look at that. We'll have other opportunities, I'm sure, to come to some of the issues it addresses. So let me thank our esteemed panelists, Minister Garrido, Mr. Rayner, and Mr. Weltman, for this hugely informative discussion. Very good day and evening to all, and I look forward to an opportunity to work with you further in the future. Goodbye. Bye-bye.